Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked on Wolves. Today on the show, we're going to try and parse all this stuff that's going on in the wake of the Timberwolves blowout loss to the Spurs on Monday night. The Wolves are 2-2, and as much as the sky can't actually be falling after 4 games, boy, does it feel like the sky is falling. We'll try and figure out everything that's happened in the last 24, 48 hours and look ahead to Wolves Spurs on Wednesday night. Plus, fun with some numbers after just a week of the season. I always like to do this. Which numbers are a little bit out of whack? Which can we expect to, kind of even out here in the next couple of weeks? We're going to cover all that on the show here today. Welcome in. You are Locked on Wolves.
You are Locked on Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked on Wolves podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beacon. I'm the host of Locked on Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more odds, props, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy Hump Day. And happy Timberwolves game day. The Wolves take on those same pesky San Antonio Spurs they were blown out by on Monday night. We have a lot to talk about today. First of all, though, a big thank you for making Locked on Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, Locked on Wolves and all Locked on podcasts are free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. If you like to listen on Apple, Google, Spotify, Odyssey, wherever you listen to shows, you can listen to this show. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked on T-Wolves and at B Beacon, and that's with two B's, two E's, CKEN. A reminder that Locked on Wolves, along with all of our other Locked on Minnesota podcasts, are now available on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV as part of Locked On Sports Minnesota. More great local sports coverage 24/7. It's absolutely free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today on either Roku or Amazon Fire TV. All right, let's get it all out there. Unless you've been living under a rock and haven't tuned into the show for, I don't know, since like Friday. Hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully you've been listening. Either way, in case you hadn't heard, the Wolves were beat by the Spurs by 9 on Monday. It was a lot worse than the box score appears. They were down 35 early in the fourth quarter. You can go back and listen to all the carnage. Tuesday's podcast, the postcast I did with Marnie Gellner from Valley Sports North that posted late Monday, all that stuff. I'm not going to rehash that whole game, but post-game, there was a lot of stuff that's happened. Recording this late on Tuesday, really in the last 24 hours since the conclusion of Monday night's game, there's a lot of stuff that's happened. It started with Ant post-game. Anthony Edwards was candid in his post-game comments, talked about, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but I'll paraphrase, that basically he knows he doesn't play well on the second night of back-to-backs. That's something that he's aware of. He talked about being aware that he didn't bring the energy he needs to bring and that the team feeds off of him. And on the one hand, it's great self-awareness. Like, this guy's 21 and he knows exactly what happened here. He knows that he's not playing hard. On the other hand, it's concerning because effort is a skill. It's a skill that everyone should have. And it, of course, harkens back to some of the pre-draft concern with Anthony Edwards was, will he play hard all the time? And while we saw blips over the past couple of seasons, for the most part, it was like, hey, he, for the most part, does play hard. He's a good defender. Most of the issues at University of Georgia, were because he played on a below 500 team with not a whole lot of talent at all around him. Certainly no other professional basketball players, NBA players around him at Georgia. And so it was kind of, we chalked it up to like, okay, well, in the situation like now in the NBA, he's going to play hard all the time. And every player has, minor ups and downs for the most part during the season, unless you're Patrick Beverly or Jared Vanderbilt, I guess, right? So, well, and fast forward to now, Ant is acknowledging that was an issue, at least on Monday. And I would argue, it's hard to, complain about that in preseason because it's still preseason, but Ant had a really bad opener. And there were some of the same issues, nothing as stark as Monday. So on the one hand, it's positive. There's the self-awareness. On the other hand, it's concerning because it's very fixable. And like, why aren't you just doing the right thing in the first place? And then Karl-Anthony Towns is asked, I believe by John Krasinski of The Athletic, how do you help Ant as a vet on the team, which Towns is now 8 years in? How do you help? What do you do for Ant? Something like that. And his response was related to Ant's diet and said, hey, I wish that he didn't eat the way he did. He said, again, paraphrasing, it's all, surely you've seen it. It's all over social media. Y'all think it's funny when Ant's talking about eating Popeyes. It's not funny. We're high level athletes. I mean, that's making the headlines. That's making the aggregation sites taken out of context. Obviously, I think it's important to watch the question, watch the answer, watch the demeanor. It's also very important all the time to do that well with everybody, but especially with Anthony Edwards. And, Chris Finch was pointed after the game. I think everything he said for the most part made sense. And then Rudy Gobert liked a tweet. I think this was Tuesday morning from somebody on Twitter saying that the Gobert to the Timberwolves trade would go down as one of the worst trades in NBA history for the Timberwolves. That one I think is pretty clear. Like it's either he's keeping receipts or or motivation currently for himself, for the team, for whoever sees it. And then of course, Kat on Twitter said something about like noise. This team is special. Not going to listen to the outside noise. That was like a Tuesday afternoon thing after everybody had already aggregated the Ant comments, the Cat comments, the Rudy tweet. Everybody's talking about this strife within the Timberwolves locker room. So here's my take. Is this weird after just 4 games? Yes. You're listening to this 8 days after the season opener. No, 1 week, 7 days after the season opener. We're 7 days into the season, 4 games into the season. And this is what we're talking about. Is this weird? Yes. Now, this isn't the only team that has a similar situation. Obviously, the Lakers had different expectations than the Timberwolves. The Sixers are in a rough spot. I think they're 1-3 as of this recording. So there's that to keep in mind. But it's also important to remember the Wolves are still 2-2. Yeah, they've beaten a tanking team twice in Oklahoma City. The other 2 teams, even though we didn't think the Spurs and Jazz would be good, they've played well so far this year. They're both winning teams as of right now, a week in. So I think on the one hand, it's absolutely weird. It's unhealthy. We should not be having to have this conversation of, do these guys like each other? Do they actually hate each other? What's going on in the locker room? Can Finch get control of this team? Can there be enough ball to go around? Can, Cat and Ant, do they actually not like each? There's no evidence to suggest that that's true. This is post-game comments through the media after a really disappointing loss and after surely being doubted, challenged, I guess probably is a better word, verbally by Chris Finch and the coaching staff after that game. It's not great that we're talking about it. However, let me take you all the way back to not even a year ago. Remember how last year started for the Timberwolves? Remember where we were sitting in we'll call it mid-November? The Timberwolves last season, remember, started at home with that, ugly win over a bad Houston team. They had an even uglier win over the Pelicans. They then lost to the Pelicans, but then they beat the Bucks on the road and they were 3-1 and everything was great. And then they lost 6 games in a row. A close one to Denver, an 18-point loss to a terrible Orlando Magic team, then another double-digit loss, this time to the Clippers. They played that same Clippers team at home 2 nights later and lost by 20. They scored only 84 points. And that was game number 8 last year. So they were 3-5, had lost 3 consecutive games by double figures, had lost 4 in a row. And then they went on the road, lost to Memphis in overtime. They got blown out by Golden State. I think that might have been national TV. So they're sitting at 3-7 last year with 4 out of 5 games. They had just been blown out by double figures. And some of those were horrible. The Clippers game was 20. The Magic game was 18. That had to have been a lower low than where we're sitting right now. I get that the expectations are much different, and that's the biggest difference. Obviously, I'm not at all denying that, but we're still 4 games in. There's plenty of teams that haven't found it yet. The signs aren't good, no, but it's effectively the same team, obviously, plus Rudy, minus some of the, and I get it. Pat Bev and Vando, those guys gave this team energy. But if that's what they're missing, if they just need a spark, we know some of these guys can do this on any given night. We know that Ant can bring it more often than not. We know that Jalen Noel is going to give you everything he has off the bench. Jordan McLaughlin's another example. Torian Prince is a vocal leader. There's guys on this roster that can be vocal, that can lead by example. That flip has to switch, yes. But once it does, this team has more talent than last year's team. And it's not a sky is falling, pull the fire alarm, whatever, analogy you want to use. We're not there yet. We're just not there yet. We might be. I mean, hey, if they lose to the Spurs, I said this on Monday, on Tuesday's show, if the Wolves lose by double digits to the Spurs Wednesday, then like maybe I have a different tone on Thursday, but which I guess maybe is a bit hypocritical, I guess, if I'm saying don't do that after 4 games. But I mean, if you lose to the same team who's not supposed to be good by double figures 2 times in 3 days, then I think this conversation becomes more serious. If Monday wasn't the wake up call, then when's the wake up call? I just don't know that we're there yet. We're not to the point of panic. Remember, this team was 3-7 last year. They were 4-9 last year. It was just before Thanksgiving, before this team rattled off those 5 consecutive wins and 7 out of 8. And even still, they were below 500 on December into January, actually. They were below 500. Their last game below 500 was January 16th. They were 4 games below 500 on January 2nd last year after losing on the road to a bad Lakers team. So there were lows last year that lasted into January. It wasn't until mid-late January that things really clicked for Minnesota, that Anthony Edwards started to take over, that Malik Beasley and Torian Prince started playing like the role players that they needed to be. It was after the COVID spells, the whole thing. There's still plenty and beyond plenty of time. The early signs are not positive. However, a week ago, everybody felt great. A week ago, the Wolves were 0-0, and all of a sudden now the sky is supposed to be falling. I don't know that we're quite there yet. That said, there are some things I want to talk about related to, lineup data, which is everything at this point is way too early, right? To fully evaluate some of these stats, these metrics, lineup data. But I think it's interesting to look at, trends that are starting to emerge. And then I want to talk about, I think first what we'll do is talk about what has to change immediately on Wednesday night against the Spurs if the Wolves are going to avoid, being embarrassed on Wednesday. So we're going to do that here next. First, though, let's talk about our friends over at LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's extremely simple to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs. You create the post, and then you add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's late October now. We're like less than a week from Halloween. It's time to finish the year strong. A couple months left in the year. Hiring the right team member might help you do just that. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thanks again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen today. Now make your second listen, the Game to Game NBA podcast. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. What it is post game. Every single host on this network records a 60-second kind of summary of what happened from their perspective. So like Wolves Spurs, you'll get that from Locked On Wolves. From yours truly, you'll get it from Locked On Spurs perspective. We combine all that into a podcast. You can follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts. Okay. What do the Wolves need to do on Wednesday night against the Spurs? Again, at Target Center. This is both games at home. What must change if the Wolves are going to avoid another embarrassing performance? Obviously, number one, first and foremost, is energy. I think I said this on Tuesday's show, maybe it was the postcast with Marnie, that on the one hand, it's encouraging that the Wolves were able to kind of flip the script in the fourth, go on an 18-0 run, 24-4 run, or whatever it ended up being in the fourth quarter. and make things somewhat interesting because, like, hey, they can do it. The starting lineup can gel and can get some points on the board and can get some stops. And also the encouragement that you can do it against the Spurs because you play them again in 2 days. On the flip side, if the Wolves had just played hard from the beginning like they did in the fourth, and sometimes, like, very rarely is it that simple, right? Like, just try harder. Like, that's not usually a solution. And I certainly don't subscribe to the theory, the get off my lawn, like these guys aren't playing hard all the time. Like, no, that's not what I'm saying. But in the fourth quarter, the Wolves showed an urgency to get to rebounds, to contest shots by the Spurs, to get out in the open floor and transition offensively and actually get decent shots, save for like the terrible Karl-Anthony Towns turnover when he forced that pass to Gobert right in the middle of that comeback in the fourth quarter. It was a costly turnover when the Wolves still were really within shouting distance. For the most part, all those things were better in the fourth quarter. And like, if they'd done that from the opening tap, I mean, we're probably having a very different tone podcast here today, getting ready for Wednesday night against the Spurs. Perhaps the Wolves are 3-1 and feeling really good about themselves. Because remember, on Sunday, by the way, going back a little further, I thought they played pretty well in Oklahoma City. It was far from perfect. They should have won more comfortably, but it was a relatively comfortable win ultimately in Oklahoma City on Sunday. And then, a win Monday, and we're having a very different conversation today, right? Related to energy, but not quite the same thing, is transition, offense and defense. Defensively, the Wolves are really struggling to hustle back on defense. As crazy as that is, some of it's complaining to the officials. It's not all complaining to the officials. It's just not running hard. And that's, again, related to energy, but it's also like they're having that issue on offense too. So defensively, it's getting back in transition. It's running back even after makes on the offensive end, because teams run after makes in 2022 in the NBA. Teams are running on everything. Most teams are just running as much as they possibly can, including the Wolves. So defensively, the Wolves have to get back after misses and makes. They can't complain about foul calls. They can't take forever to stand up after they fall over. And that's mostly Karl-Anthony Towns, Naz Reid. Those guys are very guilty of that. Jared Vanderbilt was last year too. Offensively, it's shot selection and transition. Transition should be the easiest time to get a bucket, right? You're either getting a layup like you're taught from your six playing youth basketball, get a layup in transition, or in today's NBA, it's shooting a wide open three. How many wide open threes can you shoot in transition? Now, we saw Ant have the opportunity to get into the paint and score in transition a couple of times and back out and shoot a somewhat ill-advised three when, like, hey, you could have gotten an easy two and said you took a tough step back three. Threes in transition can make sense if they're in rhythm, if you're stepping into them. Malik Beasley, that's how he got a ton of his three-point attempts, was in transition. Jalen Noel is typically a little more want to, drive into the paint and try and score at the rim if he's got the opportunity. But for him to get buckets in transition, D'Angelo Russell is a good three-point shooter in transition. Karl-Anthony Towns. The Wolves have a bunch of guys that should succeed in transition from outside the arc. But occasionally it was the mid-range shots. It was the step backs, like things that just don't need to be this complicated. The degree of difficulty is far greater a lot of the times, or it was on Monday, I should say, than it needs to be. The next thing is Kyle Anderson's already been ruled out, by the way. Timberwolves PR said on Tuesday that he's out for Wednesday. Austin Rivers is doubtful, I think is what they called him with the hip. With Anderson, it's the back spasms. Not having Kyle Anderson hurts, especially defensively. He's the, I think every time I bring him up, I mention the Swiss Army knife thing. I think I'm mostly just happy that I said it. And then like a few days later, Chris Finch said that. It was during preseason. He said it in media availability about him being a Swiss Army knife, but I said it first. So I feel really good about that. The not having Kyle Anderson available absolutely hurts. But Jaden McDaniels and Rudy Gobert both have to be better defensively. Now Rudy's actually both of them have been very good this season. On Monday, neither of them were good defensively. We saw McDaniels get caught kind of flat-footed out of not even in guarding position and get beat backdoor for a dunk as the Wolves were trying to make a comeback in the second half. That's just one example. It's not an isolated incident. Gobert just got beat by Jakob Poeltl's pretty underrated. He's a good post scorer. He's good inside. There were a couple buckets that Rudy gave up that, like, usually it was guys were going right at him. And yes, he had, I think, 3 blocks in the game and a couple were impressive, but Rudy got scored on a bit more than you'd expect. And defensive rebounding wise, Rudy let 2-3 rebounds slip through his fingertips that he normally would grab. They have to improve on that end of the floor. D'Angelo Russell, Anthony Edwards have to be better on offense in general. Shot selection, not great. I know D'Lo's numbers ended up being good. The first half was rough. Early in the game was rough. The shot selection has been rough pretty much all season for Anthony Edwards, save for Sunday. I think even his 30 he scored last Friday was, shot selection wasn't quite where it should have been. Karl-Anthony Towns needs to be more consistent. He's had a couple really quiet games where he deferred to others, which is fine. But a lot of his numbers, similar to D'Lo, didn't come till later in the game on Monday against the Spurs. Consistency needs to be better. He needs to avoid the foul trouble that he's found himself in once again at times, and avoid the complaining to officials. All those things have to change on Wednesday. The Spurs are not going to beat themselves. Talked about this last year. Well-coached teams did well against the Wolves' blitzing scheme defensively, because all they needed to do was figure out how to maintain composure, pass the ball, execute skip passes, back cuts, things like that. The Wolves aren't playing that scheme this year really at all, but it doesn't matter. They aren't getting enough ball pressure. And the Spurs, actually, a couple games ago, they lost. They lost before the Wolves. I forget who that was to. They had issues with the press. I think it was the Indiana game when Indiana came back and made it close in a game the Spurs were up by quite a bit last Friday. Indiana pulled out a press and used it, and the Spurs struggle with it. Maybe the Wolves need to try. And I get that the Spurs are well coached, but they've still got a painfully young roster, one of the youngest in the league. Maybe try some of the high wall stuff. Maybe try something aggressive defensively to try and wake your own guys up. If you're Chris Finch, wake up your own team by asking them to do something extremely aggressive. Get into the game, get some easy buckets in transition, get that offense jump started too, and challenge the young team to beat a blitzing pick and roll scheme. But in general, the Spurs are, they're probably not going to beat themselves, or at least Pop's not going to let it get completely out of control. So the Wolves have to try and force the issue a little bit on Wednesday, and hopefully we see them do that. All right. Fun with numbers to close the show. Just a few random stats, things that will change here in the next couple of weeks. So we'll close the show with that. First, though, let's talk about our title sponsors of today's show, and that is, of course, our fantastic friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for betting football and the start of the new basketball season. We're, of course, only a weekend. Despite the sky falling for the Timberwolves, there's still plenty to bet on. It's a ton of fun leading into full slate of games on Wednesday. As always, Thursday night national games. A lot to bet on at BetOnline. As always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events. That includes MLB. We're into the World Series starting this Friday for baseball, the start of the NHL season, MMA, boxing, and golf, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, a little bit of fun with numbers here to close the show. This first one, this isn't fun at all, but I'm going to throw it out there. Nobody on the Timberwolves is shooting their career average from three. Like everybody's been, except for Taurean Prince. Taurean Prince has been lights out. We know that. He's been just insane. Taurean Prince is shooting 63.6% from three through 4 games. That's, what's the exact number? 7 of 11 from three. D'Angelo Russell shooting a respectable 36.4%, which is better than last year, but below where he's been for most of his career. Everybody else has been bad. Naz Reid, 33%, has the third best three-point shooting percentage on the Timberwolves. Karl-Anthony Towns is shooting just 31.8% from three. Jalen Noel, 26%. Anthony Edwards, a shade under 26%. Jordan McLaughlin, 14%. Jaden McDaniels has yet to hit a three. He's, let's see, McLaughlin's 1 of 7. Jaden McDaniels is 0 of 7 so far this year. Bryn Forbes is 0 of 4 from three. Kyle Anderson is 0 for 1. The Timberwolves as a team are shooting 28.7% on threes. That's 29th in the league. Also notable, the Wolves last year had the league's highest three-point, or I should say, it wasn't the highest rate because they played at such a high, fast pace. They had a lot of possessions per game. They attempted the most threes per game, which is a bit different, but no matter how you slice it, I think they were third in rate and first in attempts per game. The Wolves are 15th in attempts per game and just 19th in three-point attempt rate so far this season. It's not how Chris Finch drew it up. I'll tell you that much. I get that a lot of it is, trying to get the ball to Rudy. especially the first couple games or the 2 Thunder games. Forcing the ball to Rudy Gobert made a ton of sense. It obviously worked. They won those games. But the lack of 3-point shooting has been just shocking, both attempts and makes. On the flip side, the Wolves currently have the most defensive rebounds per game in the league, the most total rebounds per game in the entire league, but their defensive rebound rate is just 22nd. Defensive issues. They are not fouling, which is weird but true. The Timberwolves are first in free throw rate defensively. The lowest free throw rate, they allow the lowest free throw rate for opposing offenses of any team in the league. I really doubt that's sustainable because Kat and Jaden McDaniels are still both walking, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. Like, they just can't stop fouling. The Wolves are 6th in personal fouls per game as a team, but the free throw rate, again, is fantastic. So that's a positive number. I don't know that you can actually hang your hat on it because we're talking 4 games out of 82, but it's a positive development to be sure. Some of the on-off numbers, which again, lots of noise here. I get that. We're 4 games in. That's why it's called fun with numbers, because we could look back on these in another week and be like, hey, that was crazy. You remember when Jordan McLaughlin was a plus 36 on off the net per 100 possessions, which is just absurd. A plus 36. The next best Timberwolf is Jalen Noel is a plus 16. So Jordan McLaughlin typically comes in for D'Angelo Russell. D'Lo is a minus 30.3 for the plus minus net per 100 possessions. McLaughlin's a plus 36. D'Lo is a minus 30. And it's not great. For contrast, I mentioned Jalen Noel was second best at plus 16. The second worst is Bryn Forbes at minus 11.8. So minus 30 to minus 11 and 36 to plus 16. That's how stark the difference has been. And they played a few minutes together, not many, but how stark the difference has been between D'Lo and Jordan McLaughlin. I mentioned, I actually spent a minute or two talking about D'Lo on Tuesday's show, talking about how poorly he played on Monday. There's a Basketball Reference keeps what they call turnovers by bad pass stat. D'Lo has 10 turnovers by a bad pass already this season through 4 games. It's not what you want from your point guard. Karl-Anthony Towns has 7, also not what you want, and has 6. Not good for any of them, but that's a pretty high number to be sure. So interesting on-off numbers. Not much else notable besides Jalen Noel being really good. Ant, by the way, is a plus 11, which is great. Cat's a minus 1. Rudy's a minus 4. Still a lot to be worked out there in that front court pairing. There's no grand conclusions to be drawn yet, obviously, but wanted to throw that out there. And then the last thing is some of the lineup data. Again, very noisy. Like, for instance, if you look at the 5-man lineups, and this is at stats.nba.com or nba.com/stats, the Timberwolves have played 64 minutes with their preferred starting lineup of D'Lo, Ant, McDaniels, Towns, and Gobert. 64 minutes. The 5-man grouping with the next most minutes is 13 minutes. And that's that lineup that actually got the Wolves the lead from 8-20 in Oklahoma City on Sunday night. That's the Jalen Noel, Anthony Edwards, Jordan McLaughlin, plus Taurean Prince and Naz Reid lineup has played 13 minutes together. Incidentally, they have a plus 64.2 net rating, that group does, in 13 minutes. Obviously crazy. It's absurd. It's not going to hold up. We know that. That's why it's fun with numbers. The starting lineup is a minus 4.4 in 64 minutes. Not great, but also sky's not falling. Now, it's inflated probably a little bit falsely by that fourth quarter, although the starting lineup didn't entirely play together because there was some Noel, there was some McLaughlin in the fourth, but that certainly buoyed that number a little bit. The third most used lineup, 5-man lineup, has only been 7 minutes together, and that is the starting lineup with McLaughlin instead of D'Angelo Russell. They've played 7 minutes together, but their net rating is a plus 13.3. So starters minus D'Lo plus McLaughlin. There's been a pattern so far this year. The net rating points it out pretty starkly, but the Wolves have not been good with D'Angelo Russell on the floor. 4 games. It's a contract year. One of my things this season, coming into the season, if you listen to the shows leading into the year, the regular season, I thought D'Lo would have a good season. We're 4 games in. He probably still will. I still stand by that. Through 4 games, though, there's no doubt he has really struggled to start this season. Okay. I guess I ended on a not fun note when it comes to the fun with numbers segment in air quotes. We'll do this a couple more times because there's like a lot of noise until you get to at least a quarter to a third of the season. But it's interesting to track these, right? Because it still gives us an idea of what's going on, and that's why I say like the D'Lo numbers, they don't lie, but it's far from like, hey, D'Lo's awful this year. Like, it's 4 games. I mean, everybody has a bad 4 game stretch. You count preseason, Ants played what? Call it 7 out of the last 9, maybe 6 out of the last 9 have been pretty bad games by any standards. Certainly Anthony Edwards standards. So, but we're not all of a sudden saying Ant is cooked, right? Like, he'll figure it out. So at any rate, we'll get back to some fun with numbers here in future shows. Thursday's show, though, will be the post-game podcast from Wednesday night's game. We will have the live postcast. If you have not listened to a live postcast yet, we believe we have all the technical issues figured out that we encountered last week. Marnie and I will go live about 45 minutes post-game after she's done with the post-game on Bally Sports North to talk for 12 to 15 minutes max, live on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel. And then following that, it will get posted immediately. So before midnight, before the end of the night on Wednesday, it'll be up on the audio feeds for Locked On Wolves if you're not able to watch live on YouTube. And then the post-game podcast, the full 30-minute Locked On Wolves podcast with myself, that will post after that. So probably overnight into Thursday. That'll be Thursday's show. The Wolves also have a Friday night game. They take on the Lakers. I think that's a nationally televised game, but we'll talk about that. We'll preview that on Friday. We'll take a look at what the Lakers have been up to, which is frankly a lot. That'll be Friday's show. And then of course, live postcast Friday night as well. So a packed rest of the week. Hopefully things turn around for the Wolves. A big thank you for those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. It's greatly appreciated. Of course, the show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at BBeacon. And you can also download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. We're super excited to have our own app, just Locked On Minnesota, on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. More great local sports coverage 24/7. It's absolutely free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today on Roku or Amazon Fire TV, whichever you have. And also, don't forget, Locked On Wolves is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. A reminder that for your second listen, you can check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. That's all we have for you today. Once again, I'm Ben Beacon. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.